He was very quiet. Welcome to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. My name is Michael Mansfield. I'm the curator of film and media art here. I'm really excited about tonight's panel discussion. The discussion tonight is in conjunction with the exhibition Watch This, Revelations in Media Art, which is on the third floor, and it's on view through September 7th. So if you have not had an opportunity to go up through the exhibition, I encourage you to go up and enjoy it, as well as the subject of tonight's discussion. You'll have an opportunity to hear from two of the artists in the show, programmers, designers, and directors, Ed Fries and Kellee Santiago. And I will introduce them to you momentarily. We do have a few housekeeping notes before I get started. One, I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones. You don't have to turn them off, but silencing them is a good idea because they'll buzz and distract us, and we'll lose our train of thought, and it won't be very entertaining. The other bit of housekeeping is that at the end of the session, we're going to have a Q&A, a moment for questions and answers, hopefully some answers. And I'd like you to go to the microphones on the edge of the aisles, or we'll have someone walking around, hanging around. The talk is being webcast, so I'd like to capture your question in addition to our really informative and fantastic answers. So, yeah, no pressure to our guests here. But the schedule for tonight is really, despite the auditorium, it's really informal. I'm going to talk a little bit about the place of video games, both in the museum's permanent collection as well as in the exhibition. I think they have a unique presence here, and we've had a long history with video games, so I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll give a brief description of the exhibition's arrangement, only to orient you a little bit about how the video games are placed, how we sort of place them in contact with other works of art in our collection, but also the sort of material and conceptual engagements that are present in the show. And then I'll have a few questions for Kellee and Ed, just to sort of chum the waters a little bit, and then I'd invite you to ask some questions yourselves. And I think it'll be great. So again, this exhibition, or this panel discussion is under the aegis of the exhibition, Watch This. But our museum, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, has had a long engagement with video games now. Just after the museum reopened after an extensive renovation, we began formulating plans to explore video games as an artistic medium. We began organizing an exhibition called The Art of Video Games, which many of you may remember, which opened in 2012 and is still touring the United States. I think it's still at the Memphis Brooks Museum in Tennessee, and I think that it closes quite soon. It continues to travel through 2016, by which time most of the games will be terribly outdated, but that's great, because it's a perfect history discussion. But the intent with that exhibition was always to explore how video games, video gaming technology, the performance, the design, the concept, and the materiality of video games, how all of those things would fit in a collection like this one at the American Art Museum. And we worked very hard to bring two games into the permanent collection. We acquired Halo 2600 from Ed Fries, and we acquired Flower from That Game Company, Kellee Santiago and Genova Chen, and have been working diligently to find a way to really talk about just how enormous the possibilities are for video games expressively, and where the creativity lies and how that relates to the collection that we have. We did place both of those games on view in the Art of Video Games exhibition a couple of years ago, alongside an extensive history of video games. But this exhibition, Watch This, Revelations in Media Art, is the first time we've been able to put these works of art in conversation with one another. The exhibition is organized as an introduction to media art and the possibilities of technology as a mode of expression among artists. And in that regard, we have drawn from the permanent collection here to highlight just how technology has affected the artist's practice, both in the studio and in exhibitions, and affected our ways of communicating with one another. Their works range from 1941 to the present, which is a pretty broad range of time. It features 16mm film, as well as video and broadcast performances, interactive and computer-born works of art, as well as digital cinema and computer-born artworks, some of which I'll talk about here. The exhibition is arranged not chronologically, but thematically. I've arranged it in what I'm calling nomadic groupings, placing works of art alongside one another in a way that might highlight their conceptual and material engagements. So if an artist is working with a particular idea or a particular kind of material, it may shed some light on an area of artistic concern. So as you might imagine, any exhibition like this is pretty challenging. We have there are 17 artworks that feature sound. There are light concerns. How much light does an artwork emit, as well as how much floor space does it take, what kind of material or what kind of technology is needed to exhibit that work. This was a long process, but I think we've created an opportunity for us to really dive into this, placing these works in conversation and in line of sight of one another. Here's a view from just from one of the hallways. You can see Halo 2600 there on your left, barely, and as well as some other works. But we'll talk about how these works communicate with one another in just a moment. In 1974, there were a number, and this is not meant to be the genesis of video games. This is just how this is sort of organized in the exhibition. But an artwork was created in collaboration, as a collaborative project between Robert Watts, David Berman, and Bob Diamond. It's titled Cloud Music. And I've talked a lot about this work of art. It was a significant acquisition for our program and for the museum, but it's really an extraordinary moment in art history, in which these engineers came together to realize and to weave together an environment of sound and video and to give you something completely new. It's a hybrid sound and video installation. There's a closed-circuit television camera there pointed out the window that is collecting sound or collecting video, and the signal is being converted in a video analyzer placed there on the table. The video signal there are 6 points on each television screen created by the analyzer that are interpreted and sent to an audio synthesizer, which fills the room with a harmonic score. So there's a video system that is reading the sky like a sheet of music. And as clouds pass by or there are changes in color and atmosphere, they strike chords that really transform the space that you're in. It's at once an interactive environment in a space, but it's also something that connects you to a place beyond your immediate present space. And you know, if ever there was an artwork, I've said this a number of times, but if ever there was an artwork that really changes the way you look at the world around you, this is it. You find yourself rooting for clouds to pass by. I'll show you a closer picture of the screen here. These two TVs are stacked. You can see the points, the little crosshairs on the TV screen. As those points change from light to dark with the passing of a cloud or changing color, it strikes a chord. And it plays in real time. There was a fantastic statement by David Berman, one of the artists on this work, that said it's really weather dependent, and it's like sailing. That if it's a cloudy day, it it responds in one manner, and if it's a calm, cool day, it responds in another, and it's kind of a really poetic piece in that manner. This is a short video clip of the piece playing. I'll shut up for a moment so that you can hear it. This is from the first installation in 1979 at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. I'm sure you're asking how this relates to video games. The artistic concerns with the environment and with programming and with the newfound technologies and the ability to express something new, I think are sort of embedded in a shared history now with what's happening in video games. The video game Flower, which we acquired just a couple of years ago after the exhibition opened, was created by Kellee, Santiago, and Genova Chen at that game company. It's, I'll let her talk a little bit more about this, but it was really envisioned as an interactive poem in which the player becomes the wind and collects petals and transforms the landscape by touching on various elements inside this space. And in that way, I think there are some really beautiful connections with cloud music and that enthusiastic desire to break down these boundaries and create something new. These are a couple of screenshots from the game Flower. I have a video of it, but I'm sure it's not going to play properly. I would say in a way that's very similar to cloud music, the audio track is a living element of the soundscape is a living element of the game. You're collecting the pedal, and each pedal you collect also strikes a note, which builds the score over time. It's an amazing experience to play the game. Sorry. Just when it was getting good. It goes back to an art history lecture. This is in the exhibition, cloud music is sort of an anchor point in the corner of the show. Immediately next to it is Flower, and then this installation by Namjoon Paik. It's not an installation, sorry, this work of art by Namjoon Paik. When he was an artist in residence at Bell Labs in 1967, he created a computer program written in Fortran that he envisioned. His ambition was to create the first computer opera in art history. And this is one of his sort of exercises in the development of that project. You can see it's written in Fortran, which is quite an interesting language. Well, it's interesting for me. Some of you are programmers, right? Sure, this is great. But you can see here it calls out. You'll see love, hate, God, and dog mentioned a number of times in the Fortran code, up at the top, and then in individual lines. This program results in this. Well, it results in this punch card, but it results in this print in the end, in which the 4 concentric circles in this print are made up of the letters creating the words love, hate, God, and dog. This was a really experimental work and kind of a landmark. But these are small words for big concepts, and very much touch on the ideas of embedding our machines with something that was very human in the human language. Elements that continue to pop up in other works that are in this section of the exhibition, including Text Rain by Camille Utterback, an interactive media installation in which letters are falling from the sky. This is very vain, but that's me, sorry. You can see letters falling from the top of the screen, and you can interact with them. You're looking at an image of yourself, both in the physical and the virtual space. And by collecting the letters along your outstretched arms or the silhouette of any object, you can create entire phrases or sentences from a series of poems written by Evan Zimroth titled Talk You. It becomes a very social work of art in which you find yourself competing with one another just to create sentences or steal letters from your friends, which is just like gaming. That's whoops. And in that same section, I've also placed a number of video works that also touch on language and investing images with meaning and the ways that we interpret and program or create codes for works of art and imagery. This is a work by John Baldessari titled Teaching a Plant the Alphabet, in which he is teaching an elementary lesson in the English alphabet to a potted banana plant. I really enjoy this work of art. It's incredibly irritating because he's sitting there saying A, A, A. It's just like grade school. And then B, B. But there are very serious issues in this work about exactly how we define imagery and what we think of as a work of art. What makes it a work of art. Just beside that work is this work by Martha Rossler titled Semiotics of the Kitchen from '75, in which she is methodically going through utensils in the kitchen to describe their use. It's really one of the most important works in feminist art history of the 20th century. But it's, as she describes the use of these utensils in the domestic space of the kitchen, her actions become increasingly violent and animated, and sort of sets the stage for the kitchen to be a place of resistance and change, but also identifies the limitations of language and its ability to really describe or act on something. Issues that I felt were not all that unrelated to the inspiration for Ed Freese's Halo 2600, which is a video game. They're very different periods of time, and the issues at stake are quite disparate, but at the same time, they're not so different from one another. They look quite a bit different. This is a screenshot from Halo 2600. It was written for the Atari 2600. And I hope you'll ask Ed a little bit more about this, because he could describe this in a much more technical manner than I possibly ever could. But he, in his experience with the video game franchise, Halo, he reinterpreted this game to play. This was an enormous video game franchise. He's reinterpreted this video game narrative, to play on an Atari 2600. So he's sort of turned this video game back in time, using the severe limitations of language represented in other works of art in the show as inspiration for sort of programming and creating something new. I don't have any sound for this video, so I apologize, but I'm sure you'll get the point. You have to get the gun. It's really kind of humorous and simple and really engaging when you're in the gallery space. It's an entirely new way to use an art museum. So with that introduction, oops. Sorry, technical difficulty. With that introduction, I'd like to present to you Ed Freese and Kellee Santiago. First, Ed. Ed created his first video game for the Atari 800 in the 1980s. He joined Microsoft in 1986 and spent the next 10 years as one of the early developers of Excel and Word. So you can blame him. He left the Office team to pursue his passion for interactive entertainment and created Microsoft Game Studios. Over the next 8 years, he grew the team from 50 people to 1,200 people and published more than 100 games, including more than a dozen million-plus sellers. He co-founded the Xbox Project, and which led him to his involvement with Halo and the acquisition of Bungie. Made Microsoft into one of the leaders of the video game industry. In 2004, he retired from his vice president's job at Microsoft to continue his work in the video game business as a board member and an advisor, as a consultant to a broad range of publishers, independent game developers, and media companies. And in 2007, Ed launched his own startup, Fingerprints, an innovative company that uses 3D color printing technology to bring video game characters to life. So, Ed, I'll let you come up first. Kellee Santiago, who's also sitting right here. She was born in Caracas, Venezuela, but she has local roots. She was raised in Richmond, Virginia. She graduated from the MFA Interactive Media program at the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts, where she teamed up with fellow student Genova Chen, one on the creation of Flower, but in a student-created game called Cloud. The game went on to become critically acclaimed and landed the two a 3-game deal with Sony Computer Entertainment of America to develop downloadable games for the PlayStation Network. The 3 titles, Flower, Flow, and most recently Journey, were each record-breaking commercial successes, but they also received critical praise, as well as awards from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Science, the BAFTA Awards, and GDC. As president and co-founder of that game company, that's the name of the company, that game company, from 2006 to 2012, Kellee developed one of the most prominent brands in independent and innovative game development, pushing the boundaries of video games as an expressive medium. She recently took a position as head developer for Ouya, O-U-Y-A, and is a partner in Indie Fund, which aims to support the growth of games as a medium by helping indie game developers get and stay financially independent, which I'm sure is no small task. So, Kellee Santiago. Safely on the podium. So first, I'd like to thank you both very much for coming. And welcome to the exhibition and our huge crowd of people.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming out.
Thanks for coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start with a really difficult question for you, Ed.
Oh, great.
Having created Halo 2600, just how many levels can you make it to on a regular basis?
You think the game's too hard?
I think the game's pretty difficult. I've played it a lot in my office, which I'm sure my director loves, but...
You know, one of the things about the game is trying to go back to those old days, you know, when games were hard. They didn't just hold your hand, you know, you had to, if you died, you had to start over at the beginning, man. That's the way those games were.
You get 3 lives in that game, but...
You know, I was telling you earlier today, the original version, you only had 1 life, yeah. Mm-hmm. And pretty much everything on the screen killed you, and my playtesters were whining at me, and finally I'm like, all right, I'll make it easier for you guys. So it's the easy version you're playing.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. You know, I thought, I read a lot about your inspiration for developing Halo 2600, and the limitations of programming were sort of relegated the Atari 20. You mentioned something about it was sort of like programming in haiku.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you could maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, this machine is really challenging to work on, which is part of the fun in sort of a sick, twisted programmer way. I mean, you have to work in assembly language, which is the lowest level computer language, and there's just incredible constraints everywhere you look. There's only 128 bytes of memory. The entire program is 4,000 bytes. I'd been saying to people that that's about the size of an icon on about the amount of memory of an icon on your phone. But I looked it up yesterday, actually, and an iPhone 6 icon is about 64K, so that's quite 16 times larger. Yeah, you have to pull up the settings on your iPhone and look at the icon next to the name of the app, and that's 4K. So that's the amount of space you have for all the art, all the program, the music, everything has to fit in that space. So if I hadn't done it when I was a kid, it's like the kind of programming I used to do in the old days, you'd probably think it's impossible. But it is possible, and of course people did it in the old days. So the question is, could we take ideas from today and take them backwards in time and express them on those old machines? And you kind of find out that you can and you can't, because there's a real conversation that happens between you and the machine itself. Those constraints impose decisions that you have to make along the way. A simple example is the Master Chief. For him to look like the Master Chief, he has to have that helmet. And that helmet is, his mask is a different color than his head. But the machine doesn't support two different colors there. The sprites are one color. So I had to take a different graphical element called the ball, which is used in Pong-type games, and stuff it into his helmet. But the ball doesn't have its own color. The ball has to be the color of the play field, which I use for the walls. So, so I had to make the walls yellow to make the mask of the Master Chief yellow. And then later, when you go on in the game, I change the colors of the walls, which changes the mask. But by then, it's already set in your mind that it's the Master Chief, so it's okay to change it. You don't notice his face turns purple. I could go on and on, but that's short.
I've always been fascinated with the idea that that those creative decisions lead to more creative decisions. In order to make it work from level to level, you're really training your audience to, training the players to sort of understand how those decisions were made, or to neglect them altogether.
Yeah, I'd say
and
kind of
just accept
almost the opposite way is that the constraints themselves force you to make creative decisions that you wouldn't otherwise make. And you mentioned haiku. Like, I give an example of this in a talk I give, where you could just say, I played Donkey Kong. It's just a statement. But if you do it as a haiku, you'd say something like, monkey throws barrels, he has stolen Princess Peach, for love I must climb. That's a haiku. Working within the structure of the form forces you, it takes you in different directions than you normally would, and it sort of leaves space for interpretation. Like that second one, all of a sudden I'm talking about love, which wasn't in the first statement. Yeah. And so I think that the constraints force an opportunity to be kind of vague, and that leaves room for interpretation, which is something we like to see in art, I think.
Yeah. I really think that video games sort of share, they build upon and share a history with painting and sculpture and photography, in that you're rendering an image with motion and sound and space. But it also shares a history with cinema and video and film. And these, that poetry and literature, are sometimes relegated to the margins of the creative practice, but it really becomes that much more important with video game programming and the work that you're doing. And I know, Kellee, you and Genova were both, or at least I've understood that Flower was really conceived as an interactive poem that was, that's where its origins lie. So it also has roots in literature and writing beyond the code, but.
Yeah, and it started from this idea, Genova being from Shanghai, so this huge megapolis almost of a city, coming to California, and you can see in Flower a lot, we take a lot from basically the I-5 drive from San Francisco to Los Angeles. There's a lot of very similar scenery. And he really wanted to capture that and share with his friends back home, and he just felt like video and pictures just weren't cutting it, and could we make an interactive experience that would tap into that feeling specifically. And through that process came the feeling that it was more of a poem, that we're sort of trying through the medium of the PlayStation 3, really, specifically at that time, through video, audio, the interactive mechanics, and then I think kind of story is another tool you have to evoke emotions in video games. But through those elements, try and get the player to that feeling. And that's not necessarily telling them, okay, now you came from Shanghai and you're in a field of flowers. It's sort of, you abstract it more than that. And it was sort of the first project we did as a studio that really took these elements of understanding sort of flow, game mechanic design that we had been practicing, and then also everything that we'd learned from the School of Cinematic Arts and sort of storytelling and media, and putting that all together to try and evoke an emotion very specifically for the players.
Do you, in your experience of actually making games, I mean, I'm sure you're thinking very technically about how you make, ball one fit inside the helmet, if you can stuff it in there. But is it just I'm trying to articulate this question is even difficult, sorry.
Yeah.
But like with the creativity in understanding where you want it to go and making the technology do what you want it to do, is that sort of a process that builds upon itself, or is it something, like, do you know that you can make the technology do it? You just have to sort of spend time with it. Like, what's the...
For us, it was always a process of discovering it along the way. And I think for most teams, that's what it is. You're sort of discovering, trying to figure out if you can make the best experience possible with the resources that you have available, either the skill set on your team or the limits of the technology, or like a combination of everything at the same time.
I guess a better way for me to articulate the question is basically about, sort of the chicken or the egg. Is it the technology comes first and then you decide what you can do with it, or...
It's actually a really good question, even the way you said it, because even if you're not making it, if you're just making a program, you run into this. You can try to ahead of time say, this is the architecture, this is exactly what I want this program to do, and in my experience, that doesn't work. What works is to get something small, get something working, and then grow from there. So it's almost organic, the way a good program grows. And if by doing it that way, you see opportunities that you didn't know were there. It's true for game design as well, right? If you had it all, I don't know, some people will make giant game design documents up front and then try to build that game, and it never works because nobody's that smart. Nobody can see ahead of time how it'll work, how it'll all fit together. It's better to do a little at a time, grow it, and then feel how it's going to go, and be open to making changes when there's opportunities. There aren't just walls, there's also opportunities. So you run into things that are hard that you thought would be easy, but you also run into things that are easy that you didn't think about. And so you take advantage of both those things.
There's I see this a lot in sort of interactive and media sculptures that we have in our collection, that the artist is really kind of reconceiving and redefining the technology to do something new. And I see that a lot in the video games that, especially indie games and things like that are being conceived. There's like entirely new ideas that are coming out of these objects. But when we were acquiring Flower, you made a really fantastic description of, you may not remember this because it was years ago in a phone call, but I was asking specifically about emulation and whether or not we would, in the long-term life of this work of art in our collection, how we would care for it. Can we remove it from the PS3? How important is the PS3 to this work? And you said that it's kind of like painting without canvas. That you really need the architecture of the PS3 in order to realize the experience of the game.
Yeah, to Ed's earlier statement, actually, that's the grass simulation, which gives so much of the feel of the environments within Flower, came out of the architecture of the PS3 specifically, and our two engineers, what they were really interested in learning more about and understanding. So also like what they were gravitating towards and what they were sort of interested in figuring out and how to use it, and it all grew organically. It truly did.
Yeah. Even for something as simple as the Atari 2600, the first 1977, the first really successful video game console. People are still trying to figure out how to emulate that today. The emulators that those of us who work on that machine use are pretty good, but they're not perfect. And people are still discovering new ways to trick that machine into doing things that they didn't know. And usually when you find something new, it will only work on the actual hardware. It won't work on the emulators. So if they can't truly emulate a 2600, how are you going to emulate something like a PS3, which is millions of times more complicated?
And they're doing a lot of that on the PS4 in order to get some of these backwards compatible games going, like Flower is now on PS4 and Journey just launched on PS4. But it's really hard, and from the customer standpoint, I get why, they're like, I really want to still play all the games that I bought on the last platform, but it's like what made the PS3 so great and unique and innovative is also what makes it really hard to make it backwards compatible on another hardware.
Especially that machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I think these video games are pretty amazing feats in and of themselves. I think they're, and I use this statement about a number of artworks in the exhibition upstairs, that they're both a testament to the fantastic advances in technology that we have, but they're also a testament to the cultural meanings that are embedded in them. And with video gaming having the very prominent place that it does now culturally, certainly in the United States and in Europe and in Asia, I think that, this
Everywhere.
is... Sorry?
That's everywhere.
Everywhere.
Pretty much got everywhere at this
I'm sure there are a couple places that don't have
India, we got to work on a little bit, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
But I think that, their place in both this exhibition and this collection is pretty firm. I feel like they are indeed artworks. And I know you had a sort of a running battle for a little while with Roger Ebert about it being a viable artistic media. He's not here to defend himself anymore, unfortunately. But I thought I'd give you an opportunity to say something.
Well, I was thinking about how it's really great the context in which our works are in this show, actually, because I think it gets sort of to the core of that conversation for me, which is that, of course, games are an artistic medium, just like any other medium. I mean, it's just components through which an artist can use to express themselves. Are all video games art? No, not all movies are art, not all video installations are art, or it's up to interpretation, but it has the capability of expression. Yeah. So I thought, seeing it alongside some of the other works using technology in a broader sense actually really captures that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, I think it's kind of silly actually to claim that they're not. And I mean, video games probably. Our shared perspective is that a video game is like a superset of most of the other art forms. I mean, it contains, movies, still images, narrative. Those are. It contains all these other artistic forms that are accepted. It just adds a new one, which actually artists also use, which is this idea of interactivity. And so either you have to claim that somehow, as soon as you add interactivity into the mix, it no longer is art.
Yeah, which
completely seems to me like a tough claim.
Yeah.
Or clearly this medium has the potential to be art, and we wouldn't claim that everything made is art.
Right.
But
I would certainly agree. I mean, not all paintings are art. If you're painting a line in the street for a parking spot, it's certainly not art unless you're John Baldessari and. You can make that claim, but there's.
It's a great idea. I gotta jot it down.
I'm sure he's not going to give you credit for that.
It's on the intent.
And I will say, when we were interviewing gamers and artists in anticipation of the exhibition and acquiring games, there was a sizable portion of those people that said, we don't care anymore. We're past that. We don't. It's not important to us. We're doing something that's really innovative and creative. And how you define art is going to change in 5 years' time anyway.
What was important was to have the Supreme Court rule that video games have the same First Amendment protection. And that only happened a couple of years ago, and that was a huge battle. So not only wasn't this medium recognized as an art form, it was actually actively censored in many states. And so that was a state-by-state battle, finally culminating in a Supreme Court ruling that, yes, we accept video games are are
expression.
Yes.
fall under First Amendment protection, just like books and movies. A great
and
thing.
on a related and somewhat other side of the coin, for me, it's always been important to try and get that recognition to happen, so that way we can all recognize that there are messages that are communicated to us through video games. I feel like it's dangerous to say, well, they're not art, and therefore they're just, I don't know, when you say just entertainment, it seems like it's this innocuous, harmless thing, but I am definitely impacted by entertainment, and I'm definitely impacted by video games. And I'd like to help people feel empowered to talk about the ways in which they communicate, because then, my big dream is that then hopefully that will motivate the industry, right, to like create more inspiring and positive games, as if we can want that hopefully in our lives.
It's actually incredibly important, and there's a great example of what can go wrong, and that's with comics and what happened with comic books in the United States. Whereas in Japan, comics or graphic novels took all sorts of forms. In the US, in the 50s, they were censored. And basically, comics became a thing for kids. And that still echoes today. If you look at Japanese anime series, it's incredible work, incredibly beautiful, rich work that simply doesn't exist in this country, because that's a form of art that's been effectively suppressed. I mean, that could have happened to our business as well.
Well, both of you are still very active in gaming and building new and innovative companies. I mean, you're both really young. I'm curious to...
Keep it coming. We're like,
So my question is, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you're doing right now and how you, like what you envision for the next 5 or 10 years in gaming as a medium of expression. What things you're excited about, what you're working on. Just before we take a couple questions from the audience.
Well, so I've always sort of gone between the creative side of video games and the business development side of video games. So as you were saying from my bio, the ways in which I could have an impact in video games through creating the types of games that I'd love to see more of, and then also the side of it of trying to understand and impact the mechanisms of our industry in which they empower or disempower certain types of people to make games, and how those games get exposed and who gets to play them and those aspects of it. So that's sort of where I've been more in this domain recently in my role at head of developer relations at Ouya, which just recently got acquired by Razer, and is moving into doing more publishing of independent games, and then also working as a partner of Indie Fund, which is an angel investment fund.
Right.
Yeah, so like Kellee, my real job, my day job is related to business in the video game business. So mostly I work with startups and sometimes bigger companies as an advisor, board member. I would go crazy if that's all I did, because I do, I'm a programmer at heart. I like to create things. Programming is a really creative medium. And so I always have on the side what I call my procrastination projects. There's stuff I work on when I'm putting off doing what I should be doing. And I recommend that to everyone. And so, Halo 2600 was a procrastination project. I recently wrote a blog called Fixing Computer Space about repairing the first video arcade machine. And it's long, and you can read what it's like to tear apart this 1971 arcade machine and make it work again. And have some new projects kind of related to the 2600 that I'm working on.
Oh, great. Well, I'd like to open it up for people to
dodge the 5 to 10 year future
Yeah,
game.
yeah, I guess
Yeah.
we might have to undodge it if nobody's brave enough to ask us the question. Come on, somebody ask us a question, please.
If not, I'll drag it back to that.
There's somebody right there. There's some. We got a
think
whole
they
bunch.
want you to go
They
to
want you
the
to go to the
microphone.
mic
Going
though,
to the
so then
mic
they can.
or-
Then they'll get recorded on the webcast.
You have to walk
So there's
to
one
it.
right up there.
Yeah.
See it?
And
Yeah.
there's one over there too.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we got a bunch of questions now. Yeah, you should go up too.
Should I start?
You go first.
So I want to ask this question as an aspiring game designer myself. You touched briefly that video games have a unique aspect to them, which is interactivity, and that this could possibly separate them or preclude them from being art. And my question to you is, do you think that there are any games that have sort of used interactivity in a unique way to create art that no other medium could? I would cite an example for me to be the game Ikaruga, which uses sort of the dual nature of the main character, which is a ship, to sort of make statements about like duality and I guess good and evil and morality, and also some other aspects of spirituality. And I'm wondering if you think there are also similar games like that are good examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think all games fundamentally do. That's, I think, they have primary mode of communication in video games. But for me, when a game in which that agency had a really strong impact on me was this project by Ito Stern and Peter Brinson called Waco Resurrection, in which you had to put on a David Koresh mask and say, I am David Koresh, in order to start the game. And then there was this sort of fantastical interpretation of the Waco house and the FBI and the government coming in, and you're combating them. And of course, it's a game, so you want to win, but you feel really, as a human being, it's like really weird and awkward. And so it sort of plays, I think, on the sense of agency, but the sense of discomfort through what you're playing through kind of similar to what we were talking about with Flower. It sort of gets through these tools of communication in games, sort of gets to an emotion that the artist wants you to feel about that period in time, in that moment.
Yeah, first I just want to clarify one thing. I wasn't saying that I think interactivity could preclude games from being art. I was saying you would have to take that point of view, which I think would be an absurd point of view to take. I'll just throw out a game. There's a group in the Netherlands that works on games that don't involve looking at a screen, which I think is really interesting.
Oh,
you
the Copenhagen Collective?
You know the group probably
Okay.
better than I do. But anyway, they had a game that I played called Johann Sebastian Joust.
Right.
And if you haven't seen this game, you use Wii controllers, and all you hear is music playing. And the idea is it's a multiplayer game. The idea is to force one of the other players to move their Wii controller
PlayStation
quick.
Move.
Or you can do it with Move. It was originally Wii, but
That's right.
she's a PlayStation.
It's just on it now. Yeah. I just move the balls.
You're right. The goal is to force the other player to move their controller too quickly, okay? And anything goes. So, people are like trying to kick each other, trying to, push each other. But the music is playing in the background, and the music changes tempo, so it'll go very slow. And when the music's going slow, you can only move very, very slowly. So everything slows into slow motion, all the players' movements. And then for a little bit, it'll go really quickly, and everybody's running across the room trying to get each other. Anyway, it's an incredible multiplayer interactive experience where you don't look at a screen at all. So I'll throw that out.
Nice.
Hi. My question is related to the last thing you both spoke about, just your creative interests and your business interests, and how to reconcile the two, in the sense that, for example, like I love that game company's games. Flower and Journey are like my favorite games of all time, and they're a lot different than anything else I was playing at the time. And I'm not sure how this happened, but they became, runaway hits despite their despite the small nature and despite, rise from this independent space.
Yeah.
And so with the proliferation of, indie games in this scene and having new tools available to amateurs and indie developers and so on and so forth, we're seeing a lot more games like this that are, a lot different than things see coming out AAA. And yet there's kind of a dual problem, I think, of of having so many, the proliferation of them, and like having potential customers like myself or anybody else being able to find them and have them be viable in the market.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, like, what do you both see as the answer to that? Is it like curation? Is it spaces like this where we can see them displayed? That may not make much business sense. Like, how do you get these games in front of people?
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is exactly the issue people are facing in the game industry. So it's a beautiful question, and it's a sword that cuts both ways. Once it's very easy for people to make games, they can be much more creative, and the games can be much more interesting, and yet we have free distribution. Basically, we have easy distribution anyway. So it's very easy to get your game out on phones and computers all over the world. But in exchange, everyone else is doing it too. And so how do you get people to see your thing? I don't know. This is like a Rami Ishmael question.
I think he would probably answer it similarly.
One of the things that they're doing, I'll just mention that real quick, and then you can.
No.
I mean, these guys are developing a game completely openly on Twitch. So the entire game development process is public, which I've never seen really before. And that's building their audience from the very start. So the audience is not just watching the 3D modeler creating the characters, but they're interacting with the person saying, oh, I think that should be smaller, that should be faster.
Yeah.
Not just the artists, the programmers, everybody involved with this project. So a true, two-way communication with the audience. That's one way to build an audience, but there's lots of strategies. I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, I think part of it is figuring out what's unique about what your project or your team or the combination of both. And Vlambeer, which is Rami Ismail's that company that's doing that project, part of it is their community and their ability to build community and communicate with them really well. And also that right now, that's just what everyone's looking at. Like, how do you build games for Twitch and YouTube and but that is sort of just a moment in time right now. I think the general question you always have to ask is like how can you make your project stand out, and also recognizing that the field is so competitive right now, and the tools are cheaper and more people have access to them, and so and at the same time, for better or for worse, I think gamers don't really distinguish between a AAA game and an indie game in terms of like what resources either project had available to them. It's all just like, is this value for my money? Right, yeah. How am I going to spend my time? Is this a value? And honestly, Genova was really great at driving us to always feel in competition with teams that had many more resources than we did. And so we always were asking ourselves, how can we position ourselves? I mean, for that game company, it was always about positioning ourselves so that we could not be compared to those games, because we were never going to have as many resources as they did, which is always my recommendation for indie developers. But also the partnership with Sony was really critical, because they also had certain quality goals that they demanded of any of their developers. So in that situation, it's kind of what led to the games looking and feeling the way they did.
But no, I'm not a believer that curation is going to solve the problem. I know there's some people who hope that will be the case. I'm personally.
What are you trying to say?
I personally am not a believer of that.
See, I think, I don't know if it's the fix-all, but there's a lot of room for improvement.
Well,
let me just say my opinion.
Sure.
Well, and maybe this is, just shows that games truly are becoming an art form, because it's like any other art I have a friend who's a painter in LA, and he says there's 100 people for every gallery show. And he says 90 out of 100 of them aren't good enough to get it. And the other 10, the reason one gets it and the other 9 don't, it has to do with hustle. It just has to do with being out there, making it happen. That they're all very, very good. And and that's some of what we're seeing in the game business happen.
Yeah.
There's an amount of hustle, why I bring up Vlambeer, that's just involved.
I would say from the economy hasn't.
I don't mean to say there's no role for curation.
No.
And I like the work that Killscreen does, by the way, which is a nice source for seeing good things.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
Go ahead. I just don't think it'll actually solve your problem.
No, I was really struck when we did the Art of Video Games exhibition here. There was a real grassroots sort of connection to the gamer community to really identify what they thought was creative and artistic in games. I think that's critically important that it have kind of a grassroots connection. That's what video gaming is now. But I would also say that there have been economic forces impacting the creation of works of art forever. And it has never been easy for artists. Every artist struggles to make a living. Some artists succeed, and they succeed because they have that hustle in the business sense in order to make a living at it. And many artists succeed even though they don't have that, and they end up sort of, under crippling debt, but still having produced a beautiful body of work. I think the struggle is just sort of you just have to deal with it.
Part of being an artist.
Part of the process.
All right. My question is actually has to do more about the aesthetics of interaction when it comes to creating video games and so forth. One of the things I thought was fascinating about Flower was the fact that it kind of subverts the idea of the controller and how it traditionally is used and people's ideas of how it's used. In the sense that, just earlier today I was up in the gallery and someone who didn't usually play video games picks up the controller and starts trying to move the sticks. And she's like, I don't know what to do with this, and she's, and then she sees the twist. But then once I kind of showed her through, it's like all of a sudden it's like, this idea, this light bulb goes off. And it kind of engaged her more that she understood that you had to use it in a different way. And that's one of the things I always found a challenge when I come to researching the aesthetics of interaction when it comes to video games, because there is kind of a mold that they're kind of forced into in some ways. First-person shooters, you might configure the buttons, but it's going to be, in a lot of ways, a very similar experience. So, my question is how do you deal with that? Is it something that you guys consciously think about when designing a game in terms of how you can subvert it, or if you should subvert it, or you want to keep it familiar for the people who can do it versus the people who've never done it?
No, definitely. All the questions that you just said, I ask myself in approaching any project. Actually, the student game Cloud, we tried to create a keyboard and mouse setup that would be more intuitive for new players, as opposed to just relying on the standard, WASD and arrow keys, and just the way that it's typically used in PC games. But what happened is we created a control scheme that no one could understand. So that's an example of it going awry. Whereas Flower worked, and it worked because the content was attracting a wide variety of people. It worked because, especially at the time, Sony was really pushing the motion controller, so people were aware of it. If you had a PS3, you knew what it did. And then it also it really fit with the gameplay. It's like it all was created around the same time. So, yeah.
One thing that I think is really interesting related to your question is, when iPhone and tablet first came out, a lot of people in the game business are like, oh, there's no joysticks, this will never work for games, blah, blah, blah. And now, of course, it's an incredibly rich area for gaming, but the style of gaming that actually is most successful on those platforms, or that works the best, at least for action games, is the idea of what used to be a really obscure branch of gaming called one-button gaming. right? And you think, wow, with just one button, what could you possibly do? But in fact, people have made incredibly complicated, rich games where there's just a single button that you can press or not press, which of course connects all the way back to the Atari, which only had one button. But
Right.
so it's been fun to see that little area sort of blossom and become so important just because this new technology came out.
Then just real quick, one little follow-up with that then, with the one question I had about Flower then, is the conscious decision not to go with Move and using it in the game. Is that something that was a choice, or is that something that just was the timing of
Timing
Move
thing.
coming out?
Timing, yeah, Move wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, Move
Because they
wasn't
still
out,
haven't gone back to it, and I just thought it seemed interesting that they would stick with the controller when Move is more inviting for that experience, so. but anyway.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. I kind of have a two-parter question, so brace yourselves really quick. Part one, you brought up preservation of games briefly and how the hardware that a game is developed on kind of affects its development and is really integral to the experience. And games preservation is kind of in a weird place right now. You can probably pretty easily find a C64 emulator and go play like Jumpman or something. But even that's in a morally gray territory of, is that legal or not? And when you get more obscure to something like the ZX Spectrum, the 3DO, and trying to play those games, it can be a little bit difficult to do so. Does the Smithsonian Institute have any interest in being an institution for preservation of games medium and that type of hardware in the same way that it is for other media? And then part two would be, going forward in the future, kind of what are the general plans for the Smithsonian Institute integrating video games into its display of art? And what is the curation process for choosing those pieces?
Yeah, this is really complex territory. And I don't say that jokingly, actually. The institution here has formulated what we're calling the Smithsonian Institution Time-Based Medium Art Conservation Initiative, which is really long. We're very good at those long names. But basically, it's a consortium of all of the art collecting units at the institution who have art collections and can meet the sort of complex challenges of preservation of media artworks. It's not just video games, but it's also computer-born works and video and film. I mean, these are really complex pieces in terms of preservation and long-term storage. Video games are new to our collection, but they are accompanied by computer-born interactive pieces such as cloud music. Cloud music is not, it's not computer, it's pre-computer, but it's also a difficult work. But a computer-born piece like Text Rain or Jim Campbell's Grand Central Station No. 2, both of which are on view now, there are significant conservation challenges for those works, and we're sort of pooling our resources and institutional knowledge to meet those challenges. This is we're in this for the long haul. These works are in our collection in perpetuity. We acquired Flower and Halo 2600 with the full intent of carrying those titles, in our collection indefinitely. I'm exhibiting them upstairs. I chose those games because they have a number of unique connections to other works in our collection, and they have an important story to tell. They're influential pieces for me. But I placed them on view in the exhibition space in the in the simplest way possible. It's just the cartridge in the 2600 connected to a TV, and it's just the PS3 connected to a flat screen and playing. I mean, there's no emulator involved now because we don't need one. I think that there may be ethical concerns about using that in the future if it really tells the story for those works that needs to be told, but those are going to have to be decisions that are made at the time. And then, to end my response, I would say that I really think that technology is going to give us the answer for this in the future. That, when it comes time to deal with, complex installation challenges of these games in the year 2050, we'll have a different set of tools available to us. And, we'll be able to identify what was important about that game or what component of that game is important for that exhibition and be able to focus on it then.
Hopefully.
So, hopefully.
Yeah.
No, I'm pretty confident. I'm an optimist.
Great, thanks.
Good questions.
I think we have time for maybe, how many more? 2 more questions?
Four
I'm
more,
sorry. We have,
four more people. Ask really fast. We'll answer
Yeah.
fast.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, first I want to thank you all for what you did. When I played Flower at the Smithsonian exhibit years ago, I actually bought a PS3 like the day after. So thank
I will
you.
tell them.
Yeah, but anyways, so my question has to do with gameplay and kind of how you arrive at the idea for how you want to create, this idea that you have. I guess more specifically for Flower, you arrive at the conclusion that the player is the wind, and you pick up flower petals. How much iteration did it take you guys to get to that conclusion of wanting to make the player be wind, and this is kind of the gameplay experience you wanted?
Yeah, we did a couple, you could probably look them up online, postmortems on the flower development process. And I think when we were putting that together, we had 12 or 13 discrete different playable prototypes of the game before we get to the one that turns into the final project. It started with, there was a Flash prototype where you were procedurally generating plants, and that was the gameplay. And because also like Spore had just come out, and procedural generation was like really hot, and so we were like playing around with that stuff, and then it didn't feel right. And then we had this idea of this first-person thinker. That was always my favorite, but we couldn't figure out how to make a whole game out of it, where it's like it was first-person perspective, and then we wanted to take this idea of how you could look into the distance, and then your consciousness kind of like goes to that place. But again, we couldn't think of like a full-length game to make out of that. And then there was sort of this golf-like prototype, and so you're like blowing a seed, and then you would grow different types of plants, and so it sort of evolves into that. And I just like this one line I heard was that a great game designer is not someone that comes up with one great game idea, but it's the person that comes up with 100 more when you figure out that first one was really bad.
99 bad ideas and one good one?
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you have to keep
sounds about
iterating
right.
and iterating and iterating, and that's, for us, the process.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I work for a small office at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and we provide small grants to local partners, and these are local partners who are working with very limited resources. But one thing that we do with them is to use art as a medium to explore topics around peace and conflict and group identity, some of these issues that can be more sensitive in nature. And I was just curious if you could reflect a little bit on the state of video games as used as a forum for civic engagement, where that stands, any advice, any tips that you have working with those groups. Thanks.
For
Civic engagement?
Oh, civic engagement?
Yes.
Like getting people involved in local issues or resolving?
Yeah, any examples of the use of video games for social good projects, for civic engagement?
I know there have been many attempts at this. There's certainly, I think, different iterations. There are video games, and then there's sort of like application of game design into everyday systems, right? So how can you, I'm of course totally blanking on some of the projects that have done this, but like, what's that? Half the Sky. Yeah, that's a good one. Nation Builder is another one where it's about sort of using some game-like mechanics to help online engagement around any issue, but a lot of maybe lobbyists or like grassroots organization leaders will use it as a way to like organize their community, because then it sort of comes with ways to reward active participants in your community and things like that. You have others. I don't know.
Probably should move on to some other
Okay.
questions.
Thank
but
you.
There's
Yeah.
definitely people doing that.
Yeah.
We're not experts on it.
I've done that for the last 3 years.
Oh,
There you
here, talk
go.
to this guy at the end.
Awesome.
Hi there. So I had a lot of questions in mind, but I'm going to tear it down to one.
Yes.
So you guys talked a lot about technology and how it's changed the way you guys worked with video games, like with the Atari 2600 and remaking Halo, which, by the way, is one of the first video game franchises I ever played. I loved it. But my question is, in the future, with the upcoming technologies that are coming up with this, specific in relation to AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality with the Oculus Rift and Microsoft's HoloLens. I don't know a Sony example, but there probably is one there. But I'm wondering what you see, how you see that changing game development, how you see that changing the narrative aspect of how games tell a story. Because for me, games are on par with books and movies in terms of how they tell the story. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, I mean, VR and AR are a super hot topic in the industry right now. Everybody is chasing it like it's going to be the next big thing. Maybe it will. It certainly opens up huge questions around game design. If you haven't tried one of these systems, they're really incredible. I mean, the Valve system, Vive, you put this headset on and you really feel like you're somewhere else. So it can create this sense of presence that you've never experienced before. The problem is, well, then what? What do you do in this new space? You can't make a traditional video game where you just have a controller and move around the space because you're going to want to throw up in about a minute, sometimes sooner. You can physically walk around the space, and that's great, but you only have a limited space. If it's in your house, how much space do you have to move around? So we need some kind of game where people get up and walk around in a space. But what is that game? Gamers don't really like to move. We learned that with Kinect. They like to move their thumbs. And so I think there's some real challenges around game design that people haven't thought all the way through yet with these new systems. I'm not a pessimist in this. I don't want to make the mistake like on the iPhone where people say, oh, you can't make games for those systems. I think people will be able to make games. Although no one really ever did figure out Kinect. I mean, no one made the killer Kinect game, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So it is possible that there's technology that doesn't ultimately lead to good experiences. But assuming, it's just a new challenge for game designers. I'll just say that, and hopefully they'll find amazing new things to do with this technology.
I would just add that my hope is that actually it allows many more people to experience installation work. It's this interesting way that a lot of sort of late 20th century art could maybe actually have this resurgence in a virtual reality environment. And with augmented reality, I'm just really hoping that by the time we get deep into that, we've sort of past the point of trying to translate first-person shooters into every single video game medium, because I actually really don't want to run around the streets and try and shoot people.
It used to be Dungeons and Dragons on every new technology, so we've made progress. Yeah. Now it's shooting people on everything.
Oh no.
All right, we're going to get our last question.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you for taking my question. I am delighted that you guys are having this conversation. I'm a fellow here at the museum. I'm working on an art history PhD. I'm also a gamer, right? And these are not worlds that intersect very often, which is very strange to me. I work on sculpture and big sculptural environments, and you get those sorts of experiences all the time in video games, right? So it seems to me that there are two big problems. There are probably more than that with the sort of larger acceptance of video games in terms of art. One is hardware, which we've talked about a little bit. Another one that we have not talked about, but I think is no less important, is the market. The way that art is bought and sold is dramatically different from the way that video games are bought and sold. Fundamentally different, I would say. So much of art is predicated on the value of the original, right, or the limited edition. Video games can't exist like that, or at least I can't think of a way that they can. Do you have any thoughts on how the market for a video game as a fine art product might work or could work?
Well, they only made 150 of the original release of Halo 2600, and those actually sell for quite a bit on eBay these days if you have the original release, which has a different sticker than the other ones. But
yeah, and you have Jason Rohr, who I think...
Yeah, talk about Jason.
Yeah, it's probably, to me, it's like the definition of the great American game designer. But yeah, he works on similarly very specific technologies, and then I've seen his works sell online as well in limited.
He made it one game that you could only play, only one person could play at a time. And they had to exchange this memory stick or something. So, I mean, there's technological advances or answers to that too,
So
of
do you think the
uniqueness.
solution is to make the game more rare, or do you think that there will just always be a conflict with accepting something that is infinitely replicable as a fine art product?
You know,
I don't know. I never thought
It's
about
sort of a
that.
question about how artists get paid, right? If you're a game developer, you could try to get paid by making something that's played by a lot of people, which is normally the way game developers think about building something that's high quality, is that a lot of people will want to play it, and then there's existing mechanisms to be paid. The rarity route, I've seen a few people do it. Ian Bogost actually did it with some 2600 stuff that he did, where he made a limited edition release. I don't know how well that worked for him.
Yeah, it's it's also, I think there's always a lot of game designers too sort of come from the idea that what's so attractive about the medium is that it is for everybody and anyone can access it. And so putting a high price tag on your own work feels almost counterintuitive to that. It makes more sense to, if you have the technology, which we do, to like make as many copies of it as would be feasible to generate a living off of it, then that sort of fits more with the medium.
Yeah, I mean, for Halo 2600, there were that original run of cartridges, but at the same time, I released a free web version that
Right.
anyone could play.
Right,
So
yeah.
why not?
Yeah.
I think, there's the work of art and then there's the art market. They're two very, very different things. I know that a number of many artists have been working to challenge the art economy and the economy of selling works of art for generations. And that's a history that it shares with video. Video is really a way to dematerialize the art object. And they were distributed as uneditioned tapes. Through organizations like Electronic Arts Intermix, where you could just rent a title, you could rent the artwork, based on your ability to play it on a VCR or whatnot. And the question becomes, especially for an art museum like this one, whether we don't focus so much on the art object, the object itself, but its interpretation in relation to other artistic practices or what it's important for. The issue we're trying to convey. And I think in this instance, we have these video games that, Flower was distributed pretty widely. But I think when you look at Flower exhibited here among all of these other works, you have a different take on that piece than you would if you were watching it on, as an object at home, And,
But it is definitely the reason that it's there. I perceive that as definitely a reason that there's like this separation between even a lot of digital art foundations to apply to have your game exhibited. It's they won't even have video game as a category. Like I have to put my stuff as digital interactive media or whatever. Because there's this weird relationship between the art world and like commercial and like if your thing is commercially accessible, then it automatically makes it not eligible to. So this is.
Which is crazy.
Exactly, which you do not agree with, and I appreciate.
No. But I love that question. I think it's something that's going to continue to come up. Especially with online, artworks that are only accessible online and how they're exhibited and how they're transferred from one to another. It's a really important issue, and it's one that's I think important to defining the economy in which we live. And
Great thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank our two speakers. And,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's it.
Great.
All right, we'll hang out.